We have to treat this issue like the public health crisis that it is, a lot of the people experiencing homelessness, and invest that money in more permanent solutions. Edmonton Police Service is one of the best funded police services per capita across all of Canada, because police didn't have to go respond to them when they were having a mental health episode, because they would have the support they needed on site and the care they needed on site. Edmonton is considered the most affordable major city in all of Canada. You actually need to rely on that non-market and build out more non-market housing, that truly affordable housing where folks who are, I'm going to give you everything you want and you're not going to have to pay more for it. And you also need to make sure that voices that are often underrepresented are heard.
When you went and played Rocket League with the U of A students, I heard you crushed them, huh?
I did. Don't be afraid to connect with somebody. Don't be afraid to even reach out to that stranger, because chances are they're going to help you, because I've seen it day.
Hello, you beautiful people. Welcome back to the Long-Term Podcast. I'm your host, Advin Villa. Today, we have one of the candidates running to be the next mayor of Edmonton. He has been a long-time advocate for smart urban growth, better transit, and community-driven decision-making. Everybody welcome Andrew Knack. We will discuss safety, housing, and affordability. His views on this reflects a deep understanding of the challenges many Edmontonians face today. So from finding a secure place to live, to feeling safe in their neighborhoods, to managing the rising costs of daily life, we all discuss that here. So the election is coming up on October 20th. So I encourage all Edmontonians listening to this to vote. Exercise your rights to vote. But yeah, learn about all the different candidates, not just Andrew. And while I think Andrew's got some great ideas, you have to do your due diligence and do your research and vote for the person that speaks your truth. But yeah, I'm immensely thankful for Andrew today. Best of luck on the elections, everyone. But yeah, this is a phenomenal conversation. I'm immensely grateful. Everybody welcome Andrew. All right. Welcome to the show, Andrew Knack, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So how would you address homelessness, mental health, and addictions as root causes for public safety issues? And what role should the city play versus the province or federal government?
Yeah, this has been one of the biggest conversation topics throughout the entire campaign. And that question of jurisdiction we'll start with, because technically the issues of housing and homelessness, shelter operations, mental health and addictions, that is supposed to be provincial jurisdiction. I think what we're coming up against right now is that they're not fulfilling their responsibilities in the way that they need to. And this isn't just an issue here in Edmonton or in Calgary. It's actually now an issue across the province. We're seeing this in many different municipalities. And as a city, over the last 5 years or so, we've really started to lean into trying to fill more gaps. We want to be partners in this. I think that's ultimately the goal, because this is a serious issue and it does require sort of an all hands on deck approach. At the same time, there reaches a point where you start to feel like you can't keep waiting. And so what I've proposed, and I think where this is, where it's been very different in these conversations, is that my proposal is that we take the money that we're already spending every year, which is about $91 million a year, which is used to really manage this crisis, and instead treat it like it is our jurisdiction and invest that money in more permanent solutions. We've already done that with some of the money by building permanent supportive housing, but how can we make sure all of that money is going in? So we have to treat this issue like the public health crisis that it is. A lot of the people experiencing homelessness, especially those who are who are chronically homeless, are dealing with some pretty significant challenges on mental health and addictions. We need to get them into spaces where they can get into recovery and get into the supports that they need, supportive housing. And then for those that have the opportunity to move from, say, a recovery space or a permanent supportive housing into something else, making sure that there's enough housing options along that spectrum so that they can be in a different place no matter what their needs are. But at the end of the day, this is something that the city needs to take the lead on. And we can use other partners. The federal government just announced about $10 billion in funding. for 6 municipalities across the country to invest in affordable and supportive housing. Edmonton was one of the 6, which is great to see. So we have a willing partner there. We know the nonprofit community is more than willing to work with us. We know the private sector is willing to work with us. So even if we can't get the province to come join us, this is something that it's time for the city of Edmonton to lead. There's too many people losing their lives. There's too many people who are going to go through amputations in the winter. If we take this and take the lead and invest in housing, mental health and addiction supports, bridge housing, day shelters, that's how we're going to make meaningful impact on this.
And so what is your plan for policing, emergency services, and community-based safety programs? Because yes, this can be an issue, very daunting for the people that are involved, right?
Yeah, and so I think this is why, we need to really lean into a lot more of the prevention, because even our former police chief was the first person to say you can't arrest your way out of homelessness, right? These are folks that, because they're dealing with significant addictions, technically when they're out in public using a substance, they're technically breaking the law. But police have said, you can, even if you were to arrest them, which isn't the right approach. Yeah. The courts are not going to prosecute them. They're not going to be put in jail for what is a significant, essentially a health issue, an addictions issue. So instead, what we want to do is focus a lot more resources into the prevention. And that allows police to have their time freed up to go deal with actual serious crime. So I'll give a really specific example. There was a development built about 10 years ago called Ambrose Place in downtown Edmonton, in the community of Bowen-Macaulay. And when Ambrose Place, before it opened up, the 43 individuals who'd moved in, the provincial government had actually done a study of how often they were interacting with police, how often they were in emergency room hospital beds. And the numbers will sound like exaggerations, but they're not. So on average, each of the 43 individuals were interacting with police 200 days a year. On average, each of those 43 individuals were in an emergency room hospital bed 200 nights a year.
Such a waste of time, just like
time, money, resources, everything you can, and they're not getting the care they need. Yeah. So when they moved into Ambrose Place, which operates on a 24/7 permanent supportive housing model where you have mental health and addictions workers on site, everything you need to be safe and secure, you saw the police visits plummet. You saw the emergency room healthcare visits plummet because they were getting the care and support they need. And so even when you factored in the cost of operating a really high intensity supportive housing site, what ended up happening is the provincial government actually started saving money on their healthcare system, because an emergency room hospital bed at the time of the study was $1,500 a night. Now it's substantially more. And even from the policing on the city of Edmonton side, we saw a $500,000 reduction in policing costs on those 43 individuals, because police didn't have to go respond to them when they were having a mental health episode, because they would have the support they needed on site and the care they needed on site. So, whether you look at this from a humanity perspective and just wanting to have everyone with the right to have housing, but even if you set aside that for a moment, because there are sometimes going to be people who say, well, they've made that choice, which number one, I would dispute and talk about mental health and addictions being a much more serious issue. But even if you had that mentality, we know that there's a financial benefit to going this way, to providing people the care and the support they need so they're not out on the streets. And then we know there's a broader community safety benefit, because then these folks aren't out in the neighborhood park. They're not out in the back alley, where even though we all have compassion in the city of Edmonton, we want to make sure we can do our best to support them. So this is a very reasonable path forward, but the city needs to take the leadership role, because people are sick of us using jurisdiction as an argument right now for inaction.
Yeah, I've read of. Have you read of Gabor Mate's work?
A little bit, yeah.
He's a physician in downtown Vancouver, and just the amount of suffering and within the people that have just started off in life, and their parents just went through abuse, and they weren't blessed it's crazy just having all these ailments on the lower class. And usually they're the ones to take up the beds, right? They're the ones to be using up the facilities. And if we prevent that, we can save so much in the long run. Uh, so how will you ensure that safety is felt equally across all parts of the city? So like downtown, the suburbs, lower income neighborhoods, and that resources aren't just concentrated in some areas.
Well, and that's another critical part about all of these conversations here that we're having when it comes to housing and homelessness, when it comes to safety. For decades, I think it's really clear to say that most cities, Edmonton is not excluded in this, would over concentrate resources in typically the core of the city. In our case, in the downtown and in our Chinatown. And you see the impact when you're over concentrating into a space. And there's plenty of great research and evidence, good medical research that shows that when you are able to better distribute those types of resources for those who are struggling across a city, you see the benefit across the city. And I'll go a further point now is that if you go into almost any community in Edmonton now, there are people who are struggling in almost every community. So sometimes there's folks who will have that initial reaction that's saying like, well, we need those, but can you not do it in my neighborhood? And what I'll often ask people is, or mention to people, is that the folks who need those supports are already living in our communities. They're living in almost every community in Edmonton. So would you rather have them in the playground or the park beside your home, or would you rather have them in a space where they have real resources and support and care? From a safety perspective more broadly, because we spend a lot of time here on housing and homelessness, but let's talk broadly because when it does come to policing, there are still issues. There is a feeling of a lack of safety. And this is really interesting because Edmonton Police Service is one of the best funded police services per capita across all of Canada. And actually, just as of a couple of months ago, they released their annual report that would suggest that our overall crime rate, is actually at the lowest point in more than a decade. And yet, when I go and talk to Edmontonians, nobody feels safer today than they did a decade ago. And so it is a reminder that police on their own cannot guarantee your feeling of safety, because if it was, well, the resources that they have should allow them to be there. So we need to make sure that they're deploying their resources in a way that helps build up that community safety. So we have a new police chief that has really focused a lot of his career on community safety and community policing, and actually making sure they're out, in the communities, at the community events, talking with community all the time, being more present, but being an active part of the community to help make sure people understand how community policing can make things better. So, this is always going to be when it comes to safety, and when you connect this, and it's not always fair to connect it to housing and homelessness and mental health and addictions, but right now they are sort of interconnected in a way that we shouldn't strive for. But I think when we think about all of these issues, we want to make sure that we have the right resources for the right people in the right time, right? So I don't want police going out to respond to somebody who's having a mental health crisis. I want somebody who can get that person into care and support responding to that crisis. I want somebody who's trying to prey on those who are struggling, targeted by police and arrested by police because they're the ones causing real harm to those individuals, to the community, to the city as a whole. And so it's making sure that you have the right places, the right resources in the right places. And there's some good work that's already underway. It's just we know that things got worse during COVID. The city of Edmonton was actually making progress on this. So from 2015 to 2019, we actually saw homelessness cut in half. We went from about 3,000 people down to 1,500 prior to COVID. And then COVID hit and we saw this explosion across the entire city. So we know how to do it. We know how to take the lead on this. And we know that police can be partners in a broader community safety work. And we just want to make sure that they're focusing their time and efforts on the serious crime, and we're focusing prevention on those that are dealing with an illness and need that support and care.
Mm. And do you have the numbers for the quantity of homeless or unhoused individuals in Edmonton right now?
So now we're over 5,000 unhoused individuals living in the city of Edmonton, and it's been really hard to see. And again, I know this isn't an Edmonton only problem. You can go talk to almost any municipality now, and not just large municipalities. You can talk to the mid-sized municipalities, and they are experiencing this. So what is different about Edmonton, and I think where there are some unique considerations for us, is that we often, because we're the northernmost major city, if we have those mid-sized cities and even those smaller cities to the north of us, they might not have the same intensity of social supports. And so those who might need more significant help can often find themselves in Edmonton. So there's an example about where, even though this is an issue across the country and across the province, Edmonton often deals with a disproportionate share of the challenge. And so it requires a more unique set of solutions in partnership with, ideally the provincial government, but at a minimum, the federal government, our nonprofit sector, our broader faith-based communities, private sector, all folks can play a role in this, and we know how to do it together.
Yeah. And what are your top 3 concrete strategies to increase the supply of affordable housing in Edmonton? So incentives for developers or use of city-owned lands, partnerships with nonprofits.
You've already, exactly. Yeah. So we'll expand a little bit on that, which is to say, and also worth noting that when we talk about affordable housing, oftentimes we need to talk about what that means, because everyone has sort of a different definition. So as a city, we need to go all the way from, your permanent supportive housing, which are the housing units in place for those who are dealing with complex and chronic homelessness, often with mental health and addictions. You also need things like a deep subsidy affordable housing unit for those that might have lost a job and are getting themselves up off the ground, but they aren't dealing with the same type of addictions or mental health as somebody else, but they need that really low cost place to start so they can get reemployed and then ultimately find themselves into another place. Then you need just sort of a what's called a market affordable housing, which is typically about 15% below what a market rate would be. You need this whole spectrum of solutions. And so with that, noting that whole spectrum of solutions, you need different partners involved at different places. So that might be incentives for those just affordable housing units that are 15% below market value. That's where you can get the private sector to really lean in and help advance a lot of that. When we're talking about more deep subsidy or permanent supportive housing, that is often led by government. And we don't have enough, I would argue, deep subsidy housing right now, which is really critical for those that are on the cusp of chronic homelessness, but who have the opportunity to sort of work their way back through affordable housing and maybe back to market housing. So that's where we need to do more work from the city perspective, and that's where we can tap into that federal funding that was announced, being that Edmonton was one of the 6. We need to use our city-owned land, as you mentioned there, to help advance a lot of those units, and we can partner with the nonprofits who are great partners in this. Ambrose Place, I mentioned, is run by Niganon Housing. They have done an incredible job. So you need partners like them, because Niganon developed their housing specifically for Indigenous residents, so that they have the culturally appropriate housing that can work through their specific needs. So you need all of those things. You need city-owned land. That's one concrete action we'll do, is use city-owned land. We'll partner with many of our nonprofit housing providers. We'll look to use our own housing providers. So we have arm's length housing provider in the city of Edmonton called HomeEd. Can they serve as a bit more of the developer, and then they can get those projects completed and built and then transferred over to groups like Niganon Housing Ventures, so that the housing operators don't also need to be developers. That's a great way of trying to speed up this process. And then where we can, and there are actually going to be some city-owned land sites where we want to partner with the private sector as well, because they might be able to build some of those more affordable housing units as long as they can do a mixed market development. We have seen that in Edmonton on the north side. I think one of the best examples is over in Londonderry, where there's a mixed market housing. Or it has regular market housing, it has non-market affordable housing. And what's great about a development like that, all the units were developed the same. So there's no difference between the quote unquote affordable one and the market one, meaning somebody that is currently renting in the affordable unit, if they get a new job and their income goes up, they don't have to leave. They just start paying the market rent, right? And that frees up another space for affordable. And so you make sure that you also provide that mix of housing options so that people aren't sort of, well, forced to leave when they've reached a different stage in their life.
Yeah, because it could be really discombobulating having to, move out again, but like having it mixed and just transition that way. And that way it's not, you're not taking on too much all at once.
Exactly right. And that's why I've seen it over and over again. So that model can work really well.
Yeah. How will you prevent or limit displacement in neighborhoods experiencing rapid growth or redevelopment, especially for low income or long time residents?
So this is why we can't rely solely on the market to solve this problem, because as a city, we're going through this right now. So the city of Edmonton is seeing very rapid population growth, 200,000 people in the last 4 years. And that's great. And that a lot of people are coming to choose Edmonton as their home, that they see it as a place of opportunity of where they can raise a family, where they can get a good education. But at the same time, that puts a lot of pressure on the housing market. So the city's levers on the market side are really to make sure that our land use bylaw allows for greater housing choice. So about a decade ago, the city of Edmonton started going down a path to provide more housing choice in all communities across the city, whether it's a newly building out community or our older neighborhoods. And what we've been able to see from that is if you go look across all of Canada and at all of the major cities, Edmonton is considered the most affordable major city in all of Canada. The next closest one, and I've been chatting with folks that are developing in both Calgary and Edmonton. So the next closest one is Calgary. And if you talk to folks that are building in both cities, you take the exact same home, a like for like exact replica, same lot size, same type of neighborhood. The cost difference between that home in Edmonton versus what they're paying in Calgary is paying $150,000 to $200,000 more for the exact same home on the exact same lot.
Wow.
And the reason why Calgary and Vancouver and Toronto and all of these cities have gone through will have such an affordability crisis is because they restricted their land supply. And this is, whether we love that housing is a commodity or not, and I don't love that it's a commodity right now and it's treated sort of like that in the free market. It is right now. That's how it works. And so we know when you limit supply, that means the price of everything of that very limited supply goes up. So Edmonton has managed to, I would say, withstand what we're seeing across the country because we've allowed for more housing choices. But even with that said, prices are still going up. Rents are still going up. 1 in 4 people renting in Edmonton are facing a housing affordability crisis. 1 in 8 people that own are facing a housing affordability crisis. And so it serves as a reminder that even though the market is building more housing here than any other major city, I think last year or this year, we were on pace to build more homes total than what was being built in the city of Toronto. So, we can put out a lot of housing and still prices are going up. They're going up slower than other locations, which is great. But that means if you really want to see a more thoughtful price structure and a more affordable homes, you actually need to rely on that non-market and build out more non-market housing, that truly affordable housing where folks who are not feeling the same type of affordability benefits. If you've moved here from Ontario or BC, Edmonton's very affordable. If you've lived here your entire life, if you're under 40, if you're on a fixed income right now, you're not feeling that same affordability benefit. And that's why the non-market housing and the expansion of the number of non-market housing units is so critical as we go forward. And that's where the city comes in. That's where the federal government comes in. That's ideally where the provincial government comes in as well. And we can work together on that. And you can still partner with the private sector to accomplish those goals. But you need to lean into the non-market side of housing to make sure people aren't displaced, because right now there is that risk in a lot of communities. And then there are frankly some communities right now in Edmonton where the only option for affordable housing, the only option that would ever exist is truly non-market housing. I represent a few of those communities where land value prices are so high. Even if you tear down the lowest price home in a neighborhood and you're looking to build a much higher density development, it's still out of reach of 90% of people. So you need non-market housing to make sure in those communities that there is a balance.
Yeah, to put it simply and be in layman terms, for the people that I'm, this is the first time they may have heard of
Yeah.
non-market housing, right? Because when they think of housing, it's like you think of mortgage, you think of just single-family home, you purchase it, it's yours.
Yeah.
But non-market housing, right? Like how
Best way to describe it, deep subsidies. Deep subsidies, whether it's rented or owned. So you can build non-market housing that's owned, where somebody gets a reduced rate on a mortgage, or they have it's like a first-time home buyers type program. On the rental side, it's it's rent geared to income, where you maybe only are paying 30% of your income to rent. So you need to have, that's what non-market housing is, where it's actually focused on really deep subsidies to help people wherever they are in their economic situation.
Yeah, because some people do really need it, and
Absolutely.
yeah, especially if you're on minimum wage and if you have kids, that is not enough. Even if you have a partner and you're getting all the support, it's just sometimes you need all the help you can get. And and how do you plan to integrate affordable housing with transit services and amenities like parks, libraries, rec centers, so that it's not just housing but sustainable communities?
Yeah, I love that. And that is something I think the city does exceptionally well, which is that we try to do a lot of housing, affordable housing, different types of developments, not just in the edges of the community or place, but in every community. So we actually have a policy that targets to have 16% affordable housing in every community across the city, because we know every community has unique things to offer. They have access to those local schools. They have good amenities close by. Many of them have good transit. And so we want to try to locate those housing options close to those amenities. The city-owned land is a great place to start, because a lot of the city-owned land is in that sort of more central location within our older neighborhoods. But we also want to see that along some major corridors where you have good access to LRT or high-frequency bus service. But it's a very deliberate decision. The city has a policy of working to try to create more complete communities. Sometimes this terminology of a 15-minute city comes out, where you have access to everything within a 15-minute walk, bus, or bike ride. And so we want to make sure housing's available in all of those communities, because that is one of the best ways. If you can locate affordable housing close to major shopping centers and transit and education options, then maybe that gives that family a choice to say, instead of a 2-car household, they're a 1-car household, and they save $10,000 a year on their transportation costs. Maybe it means they can go from a 1-car household to a no-car household, and let their family and their kids can walk to the school, and the parents can walk to the grocery store close to home. And, when they need it, they can jump on the bus and get to work or get to other places. But you need to have that connectivity. If you're going to have success in housing, especially those who are in need of support, you need it to be integrated within communities, so we're there supporting one another. That whole notion of it takes a village very much does take a village, and we need to lean into that.
Yeah. And who's in charge of the design with all this? Because I hear some of my friends like, oh, why would they put that building there? Like, who decided all this? In regards to like the design and layout, how do you go about managing all this? Is there some sort of what's it called? Do you guys hire like a person specifically just for the time or not the time, the person that's in charge of ensuring that everything is walkable, and then there's a transit system nearby?
So until about 2020, the city's main role in housing was more, we would provide some grants or some funding sources to organizations that were doing it themselves, because housing is typically the provincial jurisdiction. Back in 2020, the city of Edmonton started down a path where we started building some of it ourselves. We would tap into other funding from other orders of government, but we led the construction of some of those units. And the way we did it is we used city-owned land in most cases to make sure that we knew where those sites could go. And in terms of design, a lot of that tried to be done with community, is recognizing that we started that work in summer of 2020, so right after COVID had started. So there was engagement, but COVID engagement, which always feels a little different. But the idea was making sure that those options were more centrally located, that were closer to amenities, shopping centers, transit, And so in those cases, the city did have designers and worked with housing providers to design what those would look like, how they would operate. And I think that's why, as we started going down this path over the last 5 years, it's why I feel a lot more comfortable as a city saying we can take the lead on this, because we've now done it. We've seen what's worked. We've seen a few examples of where where it isn't working exactly as intended. And so we can incorporate all of that knowledge together and take the leadership role in this going forward. And so I would like to, we already have a housing team within the city of Edmonton. They do incredible work. How do we scale up that work? How do we tap into that talent even more to making sure that we're building those complete communities, both broader communities, but also complete communities within those buildings?
Yeah. That's, and when it comes to affordability, how will you control or reduce property taxes, utility rates, fees, or transit fares in a rising cost environment without compromising essential services?
The tough question that always comes up. And I think we have to, we'll ask it more directly. Can you increase services and decrease the budget at the same time? We're going to be frank. The answer is no. Now, you used a word that I think is really important. How do we control our property tax increases and be thoughtful about it and be responsible about it? Because as the city expands, we do need to provide those services. We see growing demand for our transit system. We need to get more buses. We are short 4 fire halls in the city of Edmonton. We have renewal needs across our older neighborhoods. We need amenities like libraries and recreation centers. These all have a cost. And I've been very clear during this campaign that we need to be honest with Edmontonians about how these budgets work. It is politically one of the most easiest things to say, for me to just look into a camera and say, all right, I'm going to give you everything you want and you're not going to have to pay more for it. But then when you actually think about that for more than 5 seconds, you realize that's likely a promise I can't make. And so this is why what I've always said during this campaign is that I want to go through and set a new foundation to our budget. So actually work with Edmontonians to recreate how we're budgeting, really help set what priorities we want to invest in and where we're comfortable with doing less in. And then making sure that we're still, over the next 4 years, investing in those services and amenities that do make things better. So I mentioned, right now we have on transit, we have space only for 25 more buses. But we desperately need those buses because there are communities that are without service, or there are communities with very limited service that need enhanced service. 25 buses won't get us a long way, but we should still buy those buses over the next 4 years so that we can further expand our service while we wait for our new garage to be built. The 4 fire halls I mentioned, sure, we'll look for partnership opportunities with the private sector, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a cost to building those spaces, and we need that for safety and security. We have, you speak about affordability. I'd like to see us expand the programs like our leisure access and ride transit programs, which serve those in the lowest incomes with free or reduced cost access to core services like recreation and transit. So I want to make sure we're still investing in Edmontonians. And I think when we talk about being honest with Edmontonians about the budget, it means that there will be costs that continue to go up, but we need to be responsible how it goes up. So the city over the last 8 years went to either extreme. So if you go back to my previous 4-year budget from 2019 to 2022, we actually had the lowest property tax increases in more than 25 years. But we weren't keeping up with population growth, we weren't keeping up with inflation, let alone population growth. And you can only do that for so long. And so in this 4-year, we saw much larger increases, and it's put a lot of pressure on folks. We need to not sort of be on this pendulum where you're going from one extreme to the other. My plan is to say, how do we be more moderated about our increases going forward so that we're still investing in our city, but we're also ensuring costs aren't going up in a way that's creating an affordability crisis for other folks as they are struggling.
And what steps will you take to manage the city's budget and contracts? So procurements, waste, administrative overhead, to find savings that can protect affordability for residents.
So that leads back into this motion I made in December, which will result in a restructuring. So the concept behind this motion was to say, what if a city exactly like Edmonton appeared tomorrow and they didn't yet have a budget? what would they put in their budget in 2025 or in 2026 that maybe we're not doing because we've been using, our budgeting process is you take the previous 4-year budget, you make some changes, but ultimately you're still starting from the same foundation. We need to ask ourselves, are we using the right foundation today? So this process, how it will work is it starts in January, and every single branch will be presenting to the next council. So all 73 areas will go through, be providing a breakdown about how their budget is being spent, the results that they're seeing, any audits that have been previously done, how they've been implemented, the results of those audits. So it's going to be a long exercise. It takes 10 months but that is the process we need to set ourselves up for the next 4-year budget cycle. And I think it's going to be a great way of helping to determine where we're prioritizing. But the other component, so that motion's already made, that process is already going to happen unless the next council chooses to overturn it. I don't think they will. My hope is they don't. I think this is actually the reason I made this motion is I wanted to give them a bit of a gift to say this process will be really beneficial for you. What I want to do as mayor is to make sure that we're not just doing that process in City Hall, but in fact, we're headed out into the community, as many different places as possible to talk through this, show people what it costs to provide different types of services, get an understanding of what they genuinely prioritize, what they want to see money invested in. And use that insight and that input to help inform what we're going to set as our next 4-year budget. Because at the end of the day, it's real easy to get frustrated about costs, especially when they're going up every year. So we have a responsibility, and I think I have a responsibility as mayor to get out and make sure we're talking about that with the people who are impacted by the decisions that we make. Really show them what it takes, and then use their insight to help make better decisions. So that's one of the best ways that we're going to be able to go through and find efficiencies, find savings, find areas where we can redirect, but also make sure we understand where they want us to invest more in. And we need to do this as a community. That's how you make better decisions. That's how you build a stronger Edmonton, is that you do it together as a community.
Yeah, it's getting to know what the people want. Because at the end of the day, right, it's for the people. Like, who are the ones to revel in the new facility and to be surrounded by all the parks and playgrounds. And if they feel no need for the parks and playgrounds, then of course it's not going to be good use. Right? If what they need is more so the housing side of things or fixing the roads, and of course we're going to allocate money to that. But if it's, more in the facilities and the rec centers, then we'll allocate to that. But it's just like talking to the people. And I haven't been into politics. I've talked to politicians all around Assured Park and Edmonton, but even just within the U of A or just in my family, it's like, do we need a new fridge, guys? Yeah, we probably do. It's been malfunctioning all this time. So maybe it's time to be replaced. Well, laundry or the washing machine, if it's giving us a headache, right, maybe it's best that we invest in that. Right? And it's just going about and ensuring that we're all on the same page.
That's right. Or at least trying to make sure we have a greater common understanding, because in a city of 1.2 million people, you'll never have complete agreement.
You're not going to please everyone.
And you also need to make sure that voices that are often underrepresented are heard by those that might feel like, you might, if you're not facing a housing affordability crisis, you might not see the need, but you need to hear from those voices who are facing that. And that might help you feel better or differently about when we're making that investment, even if you don't support it yourself.
Yeah, it's getting them to understand that, I didn't get what I want, but this happened. But why did this happen? This happened because somebody else needed it more than you do. And if you're not involved in your community and you don't really talk to anyone, or if the leaders don't tell you what's going on, then how are you supposed to, give the longer end of the stick?
That's right.
And you have the short end, and it's like, it feels unjustified. It feels like you're being wronged. But all it takes is just getting the understanding. And I always say that the antidote to judgment and resentment is communication and just understanding.
100%.
Builds empathy, compassion. So how do you plan to ensure that when the city expands or invests in new infrastructure or amenities, it does so in a way that doesn't drive up costs for existing residents?
Hmm. Another really good question. So,
But
because for most of the history of the development of our city, especially over the last 3 decades, almost every new
Mhm.
residential development ended up adding
Mhm.
costs to existing Edmontonians.
Mhm.
Because for decades, the city didn't have a certain set of requirements to make sure that that growth was better paying for itself. And there's a few reasons for that. There was actually provincial legislation that restricted how much the city can collect in what's called an offsite levy. So the cities for many decades could collect the cost of the roads and the utility infrastructure, but that was pretty much it. Fire hall, rec center, library, all of those were not something that could be collected through the development of a new area. There were some changes back in between 2015 and 2019 that started to allow municipalities to collect a bit more, and then those rules were subsequently additionally changed. So there's limitations that of what the city can legally recover and cost. But all of that said, I will say that so it didn't get much attention, and I wish it did. But earlier this year, there was a neighborhood structure plan, and so what that is it's a plan for an undeveloped part of the city, and on the south side. And this was the first neighborhood structure plan that, when it came forward, there's a cost analysis of all new neighborhoods to add up how much you get in property taxes, how much the infrastructure costs, and it determines sort of the viability of that. This was the first neighborhood that actually pays for itself in the property taxes that we're getting. So we now have a bit of a framework. So what we need to make sure is that any new neighborhood that will get built needs to have a similar financial viability. The city cannot be the ones, the Edmontonians cannot be the ones making up the cost difference of those new neighborhoods, because that is the single biggest driver of property taxes. So the outward expansion of our city has been the single biggest driver of our property taxes. And we made a decision back in 2020 that we will not continue to annex land. We will not expand our boundaries. Essentially, we wanted to stop the bleeding of multiple decades of decisions that have added cost to our property taxes year after year after year. And so I'm glad that exists now. We have a framework that can work in other new neighborhoods, but we have to also, again, this is part of being honest about the budget. When you've allowed this to go on for 3 decades, we're going to be playing catch up for a while now. So there's still going to be another couple of, I would say probably another 10, 15, 20 years where there's neighborhoods that are under development today that were approved under an old set of rules that we're going to have to pay for to bring in those services and that infrastructure. So it's just the reality of how the city's developed. I think we've made subsequent decisions to not make it worse for future councils, but there will still be costs for those fire halls that are needed. Those 4 fire halls that are needed, there's no way to build them without covering them through our property taxes, and so we have to be aware of that as we go forward.
yeah, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Correct.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
There's always going to be costs, and not everybody can win. It's what I've learned. But yeah, you can't please everyone, but you can ensure that you try your best, right? Because at the end of the day, it's just doing what's best for the people. And yes, you're going to get some backlash, and people are going to be unhappy with you. And how do you go about dealing with all the frustration, resentments, as a leader, which you have been for how many decades now?
12 years now.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah.
12 years. How do you go about kind of the backlash?
I think it comes back to a comment you made earlier, which is communication is so important in politics, because at the end of the day, you're right. We can't please everyone. And there are such diverse perspectives that the best way to try to continue to bring people together or help reduce the animosity that can exist sometimes in politics is be out in the community talking about what you're doing. So as a city councilor for 12 years, I don't door knock just during elections. I door knock every single month. And I've been doing that for 12 years, so that in the middle of a term, I'm still out in community talking to people at their doors, hearing from them what they're frustrated about, being able to share some of what we're working on, and seeing if we can find a common understanding. I do the same. I host regular town halls in person and online As part of this mayoral campaign, I'm doing telephone town halls. I was out at I'm out connecting with students at the U of A by setting up
Playing Rocket League.
And chatting with them. The idea is you need to be out as mayor or as any type of elected leader or any type of leader, I would argue. You have to be out in the community. Don't make people come find you. Because if you're making people come find you, they're busy with life. So if they're frustrated with something, chances are they're not going to come find you because they have stuff to do. They have their family to take care of. They have their work to do. If you're out there regularly talking about what you're working on, why you've made the decisions that you've made, which is a really important piece, you can talk about the why. Again, you might not convince somebody that it was they might not believe that was the decision that they would have made, but maybe they can understand why you've made that decision. Because maybe there's other folks that are benefiting from this that will be able to be impacted by that decision, and that might help them at least respect your decision, even if they don't agree with it. So communication is so important. Having conversations like this to be able to talk about what are you working on, why are you making these decisions, how did you try to incorporate different feedback. That's one of the best ways to keep people sort of coming together and united, because as long as they understand that you went into the decision with a good place, with a good heart, having really critically thought about all of the evidence that went into that decision, 9 times out of 10, I find people will say either I agreed with you or I didn't agree with you, but I understand why. And that's the best place to be in a world, especially in a political world where politics is so divisive, where at least in a lot of politics, you're looking to say, oh, they made the wrong decision and you should be angry at them. That's what a lot of politicians are doing now, trying to vilify the other side. My view, as somebody that grew up on a very different side of the political spectrum than I am now, I remind myself that there's plenty of people here with good hearts who have different perspectives than I did, but maybe they actually share the perspective that I did when I was growing up. And so I can actually engage with them and talk with them and share the language that they might use to help bring those folks together. So you got to engage, you've got to stay connected, you've got to put yourself out there in as many different ways as possible so that people can understand the why, and that people also have the opportunity to share what matters to them and why it matters to them. That's how you generate a more positive political environment.
Yeah, I love that. And then, when you went and played Rocket League with the U of A students, I heard you crushed them, huh?
I did. I purposely picked a game that I'm really good at, and I thought I did think I was going to lose a couple, but it was very satisfying to crush everyone.
You didn't lose at all.
Didn't lose at all.
Wow. No. You guys got to do better.
Yeah, we got to get their I'm glad the esports team didn't come down, because then I would have been worried. So.
But I too have had my mind changed many times over. Like there's some, like in a week, like, I changed my stance on housing. I changed, after reading Gabor Mate's book, I changed my stance on unhoused individuals, because prior to reading his book, I always thought that, it's a choice. Like, why just don't do drugs? Just don't do it. You don't have to. Just work harder.
Yeah.
But then come to find out that these people have gone through such tumultuous times, and they weren't born into a life that many of us are so fortunate to have.
Yeah.
Like some people grew up as orphans, and I've had some people on this podcast that have been in the youth that grew up without parents, and just their friends, their community that they grew up with, 99% don't get out. Like usually a lot of them are within, get in drugs or get in prostitution. It's very rough. And so for me to think that, like it's just a choice, right? It was very, I was just very uninformed.
Yeah.
But then from educating myself and just reading these books and from talking to people like you, I come to find out that, right, that's something that I don't think I was wrong, but it was just, I was uninformed, right? Because in some ways, yes, like it does require will, right? To not engage in an activity.
Yeah.
But how do you go about kind of managing all the different ideas? Because I'm sure you hear a lot, different perspectives. You talk to hundreds of people every day.
Yes.
Right? How it's discombobulating, right? Having all this new information because you have to read this and you have to read that and you're getting a call here and you have to come to a podcast. Right? How do you go about that?
It's making sure you're still trying to bring in all those voices, and then you're also, at some times you have to weight different information differently. You talk about how you sort of shifted your thinking on this, because I had the same thinking when I was growing up too. I was like, oh, well, why aren't they just making different choices? And then you realize as you start to get out, you understand the why, similar to what you talked about. So what I've realized as a counselor now is that my job is, when I'm hearing those voices, if we're talking about an issue that, take housing and homelessness, mental health and addictions, there's a lot of good medical research that's in place now. And so you go talk to the experts who have done these studies, who understand it, and you put a lot of weight, you probably put a little more weight into that perspective than somebody who simply believes that, anyone that's homeless has made a choice to be homeless. But you still talk to that person. You understand why they think that way. And then you try to bring in some of the information. Hey, were you aware of this? Did you know that these studies have shown, in fact, that's not the case? So because my background's business, I went to the U of A for business, marketing's my background. That's where I'm a little more knowledgeable. And so what I've realized over the years is that there's so many issues that we deal with, and there's so many different voices. You try to bring in as many expert voices as you can. And then on other issues, you also make sure you are incorporating the perspective of somebody that might not have that medical background or that scientific background or environmental background or, engineering background. But you still understand why that voice matters. So when we're talking about roadway construction, on one hand, the engineers are going to tell you, like, you need to do it because this is done. This is, this road's in this condition. It's got to be done. So it's very matter of fact. And then you talk to the community, you say, like, listen, I get you need to do this work, but, there's 3 other roads under construction beside my home. Is there a way that you can space this out differently or try it in a different way? Right. And so that localized knowledge still really matters, even if it's not coming from a place of expertise, using air quotes, saying that it comes from a place of understanding of what you're dealing with and the impact it's having on you, and incorporating that still matters. And again, there might be times where it's like, no, that bridge is going to collapse in 2 weeks if we don't do something, so it needs to be done. In which case, you can go back to that person and say, here, I know your opinion on this. Just so you know, here's the technical study that shows it needs to be done, and that can help. But again, it's bringing in all of those different voices in different ways and understanding how each voice is impacted by the decision you're making, and trying to make sure you get out of your echo chamber. In politics, you can get trapped in an echo chamber. Why I go out and do as much engagement as I can is because there's 30% of people who will love me no matter what I do. There's going to be 30% of people that hate me no matter what I do. And then there's a bunch of other people who are busy living their life, who have, good and like certain things, don't like certain things. You got to talk to all of those voices, including the 30% that hate you. Understand why they hate you or dislike you. And hate's maybe a strong word, but that all helps you make better decisions.
Yeah. It's very, very critical that you absorb all the information holistically, because if you neglect the hate part of things, you're just living in la la land.
Exactly.
If you focus on all the love, and you can be disillusioned and think that, I'm making all the right decisions, because nobody's perfect, right?
No.
At the end of the day, we all make mistakes, but we can correct them.
That's right.
And we can do better for next time. And that's we're at 9 here. I know you're a busy guy. For the people that want to reach you, where can they find you?
So you can find me pretty much on every social media just under my name, Andrew Knack. You can reach me by phone. I've actually been giving out my cell phone number during this campaign, my personal cell number. It's 780-267-1442. People can call or text me, send me a message through WhatsApp. I want people to know that they can reach me whenever they want, and genuinely, I'm interested in hearing from as many different people as possible. So please reach out. Let me know what you care about, what concerns you, what we need to keep working on. Because at the end of the day, those conversations are what help us make the right decisions as best we can going forward for people.
Yeah. And do you have any words of encouragement for the people that are suffering out there? Because I know we talked about housing, the safety, and even the perceived safety is a big thing. affordability, for the people going through a tough time? What do you have to say?
Yeah, I would say, it is more challenging for a lot of folks right now. And even with some of the things we talked about today, there's a lot of folks that are struggling, whether that be with affordability, whether that be with housing, whether that be with maybe an addiction or a mental health challenge. And I would always remind folks that, as while we still have a lot of work to do, there's also a lot of great resources for people. And I think sometimes we're a little scared to reach out to those resources, to reach out to somebody in our network, to reach out to that friend and share what's worrying us and what's causing challenges. And so, I think this is where it matters for elected representatives. Maybe you feel like you don't want to burden your friend or your family member with this. Maybe it is that you reach out to me, you reach out to some elected representative that so they can connect you with resources. If you maybe feel like you don't want to, there's sometimes a stigma with mental health, and maybe you don't want to start by reaching out to a friend or family member. Well, you can reach out to someone else, like an elected representative, and they can connect you with those resources. So there is a lot of good in our city, in our province, in our country, in our world. And yeah, there's some really big challenges, but I know, and I see it through this campaign. Like, the thing that I try to remind myself, and the thing that gives me so much inspiration and hope, is that every day I'm out, I'm meeting new people. I'm connecting with new community members who are doing just incredible work in the city that gives me that hope and that optimism that I know we're going to be better, that we can continue to be better, that we can continue to build a stronger city. And so know that there are so many people who want to help, and don't be afraid to connect with somebody. Don't be afraid to even reach out to that stranger, because chances are they're going to help you, because I've seen it day after day after day in the city. And I know that's what we're all about, is helping one another. And so for those that are struggling, there's a community ready and willing to help you.
Yeah. I think people are good,
Yes.
I always see someone just with all their different ideas, whether I'm on campus, whether I'm at the gyms here, the recreational facilities, and just communicating with them. If I tell them about my struggles, they'll, like, a lot of people will listen. It's actually crazy, because my generation, and Gen Z, seems like we're plagued with like kind of depression, anxiety, and we're like, oh no, what are they thinking of me? But really, just talk to someone, right?
Yeah.
Reach out. There's always someone willing to help.
Absolutely.
But yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew. I know you're busy, so thank you for making the time to come on the long-term podcast. Yeah,
it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for telling the stories and for all the work you do each and every day.
Yeah. And as always, to everyone listening and watching, there is a place for you in this chaotic world. Never lose hope, strengthen your faith, and keep it long-term. Andrew Knack, everyone. Vote on October 20th, if you haven't already. Peace. That's it, sir. I just need a couple pictures with you. See